All right, guys. Welcome again. This is going to be the English Civil War and the Puritan Revolution. The PowerPoint is actually going to continue on. I think we're going to stop at 1660 with the Restoration slide, and then after that, we're going to send you guys to breakout rooms, and then we'll finish on Monday with the Glorious Revolution. But that's where I'm hoping where we go. On the back side, this is actually a political cartoon that was drawn during the time of the English Civil War. And it looks so similar to what we have, isn't it? Where we have polarization. You have the Cavaliers versus the Roundhead kind of dudes over here. They're politically banging. They hate each other. They have these dogs. So I think it's a pretty cool image. But the whole point of that was just to say everybody was just being kind of petty. But with that said, let's go ahead and look. All right. So yesterday we finished up James I irritated Parliament, but nothing really happened negatively. But when he dies, Parliament decides we're going to do something about it. So what are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to limit the power of the king. So in 1628, we get the thing called the Petition of Right. Parliament attempted to limit the power of the king. The Petition of Right, 1628, limited the power of the king by saying only the parliament can create new taxes. So let's look. The king cannot make any tax without the consent of parliament. This is their attempt. They're like, hey, if you need money, you need us. They're trying to gain that leverage. They want to define their power to make sure that the king isn't shifting into absolutism. Parliament believed this was their liberty. And you're going to hear me use that word, but Parliament felt very, very empowered. Both the nobles, the lords, and the gentry. They wanted to maintain their power. Similar to Poland and their session, but the difference is the king still has a lot of power. But with that, the Petition of Right was supposed to curb the king's power. Well, how did the king react? The king basically gives him his finger, doesn't he? He says, whatever. And what he does, from 1629 to 1640, he refused to call Parliament. He hoped during this time period, if Parliament's not meeting, the English paradigm would shift to absolutism. So he's thinking long term, maybe not just him, but his Stuart dynasty. He wants to ensure that the Stuarts have secured absolute power. And he believed this was his liberty. Go back and read the True Law of the Free Monarchy. That was his dad wrote that, right? So therefore, he felt the same. So the conclusion, I just want to make sure you understand, the MPs were polarized. They waited for the moment to steal back their liberty. They're angry because only the king can call Parliament. So therefore, as Parliament was by themselves, there was no way they can meet together. So they were waiting for an opportunity to steal back their liberty. And during this time period, we get this thing called the years of personal rule, 1629 to 1640. That years of personal rule, Charles is going to exaggerate the MP angers. How does he do that? Well, financial. He needs some money, doesn't he? So you guys were reading, what does he do? He finds old medieval taxes that weren't canceled, like the ship money. The ship money dates all the way back to 1200s. It just wasn't used any longer. But what does he do? It's not a new tax, so he implements it. Do you think Parliament was like, oh, you got us? No, they thought he was violating the petition right, but he wasn't. Religiously, he caused even more chaos because the Puritans believed he was popery or Catholic. The Puritans believed that he was trying to change the paradigm so it would go back to Catholic. So what do we see here? Charles marries the French princess Henrietta. She's Catholic. And he's like, hey, what's up? So that marriage really secured this idea that maybe Charles I is really a Catholic. The Archbishop William Laud, he used this thing called high church practices. The high church practices were Anglican practices that were really focused on the seven sacraments. They were also focused on the centralization of the church. Both those two things looked really, really Catholic, right? So the Puritans were like, wait a minute, you are evil, you are bad. The Puritans believed that this was popery, an attempt to subjugate England to Catholicism. Now, all of that's a lie, but it doesn't matter because the Puritans are the ones that are going to push out that narrative to secure people. We're going to talk about that. But this is kind of important that Dr. Spilolo doesn't talk about at all. Let's see what it says here. The Puritan MPs, they were the merchants. They were the ones that controlled the printing presses. And what happens here, they realize the religious practices really controlled the paradigm on Sundays, but the Puritan MPs controlled the media. So for 5 or 6 days a week, they would print out pamphlets that really talked about that the king was evil. And the members of parliament, we represent your liberties. So all of a sudden, we begin to see this unfold with the ship money, with the religious practices that were kind of tending towards Catholicism. The Puritans began to pump out information to the people. In today's world, we would call that fake news, right? We would call that fake news. But by 1640, as pamphlets were being published, people were reading, people began to think the king is evil, parliaments are liberties, parliament's not meeting, so therefore the king still in a way are liberties. So now they're waiting for an opportunity. So what has happened is, with the financial and religious policies that ticked off the members of parliament, the Puritan MPs have now controlled print culture to convince people of England that only parliament represents their liberty. That's going to be kind of important. Now, before we move on, I like this image right here. And the reason I really like that image is that that's a picture of Charles right there. But all of those images behind him are all the things that cause chaos. And if you wanted to, you can look those things up. There's some cool stuff. But in the end, what I wanted to make sure you understand was during the 1630s, during the personal rule of Charles I, he does things such as implement ship money and new religious practices apart from Parliament that irritates Parliament. And that's where we're headed. Alrighty. So now, Charles I. So Charles I is like, I'm living life. Ship money was paying the way for governing. He didn't need Parliament. He's like, I have won. Parliament tried to limit my power, but screw them. I'm in power. Unfortunately, his religious practices caused a rebellion in Scotland. And again, going back, remember, the Church of Scotland was traditionally Calvinist with John Knox. If you remember him, he's now dead. But what happened was Charles I and William Laud attempted to centralize Scotland and England under the Book of Common Prayer. The Scots were like, no, we're not Anglican, so they rebelled. Well, he's able to pay for day-to-day governing, but he's not going to be able to pay for a war. So he is forced to recall Parliament. He recalls Parliament because he needs money. He needs Parliament to create a new tax. Do you think that's what they're going to... Are they going to, hey, I won't give you money? Because once they give him money, he's going to disband them. So instead of passing new taxes, Parliament focused on its own power. And what is the detail? We know that's true because instead of a tax act, what did they pass? Yeah, circle it. It's the Triennial Act. They tried to force the king to sign the Triennial Act that said that Parliament would meet at least once every 3 years, guaranteeing a parliamentary government. Charles said, screw all of you. I don't need your stupid tax. And he absolutely ignored it. But does he get his new tax? Parliament will not give him a new tax until the Triennial Act. The king was outraged. And this is where so now we're going from short term, right? Yesterday in your assignment, those were short term. We began to see the things began to quicken. Charles I does a lot of things that irritate Parliament. Parliament now is waiting to be triggered. Now Parliament feels like they're empowered because the king needs them for new taxes. Well, all of a sudden, the Irish rebelled. And once the Irish rebelled, there's 2 rebellions going on. He's in desperate need for money. So he's forced to sign the Triennial Act. He gets his tax, but Parliament now feels like, hey, they're cocky, they're arrogant. We have more power than the king. And that's when they attempted to strip away the Episcopal Church. They attempted to create a bill that got rid of the king's authority of appointing bishops. They wanted to implement a Presbyterian system. And the king yelled out, "No bishop, no king." And what that means is, if you take my bishops away, you take my kingdom away. The king had enough. He was frustrated. He felt that he had given in too much. And what does he do? He actually sends his cavaliers to invade Parliament. He invaded Parliament. That would be like today. If President Trump sent in the military into Congress, that would be way crazy. That would polarize the country. That snaps. So really quickly, guys, I would argue when the king invaded Parliament, that was very similar to the defenestration of Prague. Remember, the two military sides jumped to war, and likewise, waiting in the wings, the king's army, the cavaliers, and the Parliament forces, the New Model Army, were waiting. And once he reacts, once he invades Parliament, clearly the people are like, "Oh my God, the king is doing bad things." And that is the immediate cause of the English Civil War. And with this, we see the armies. A couple of you guys kind of had a difficult time yesterday with the armies. Not a big deal. I got your PowerPoint right here, guys. I want to point out, what's the Parliament's forces? The Parliament's forces are called the New Model Army, or Roundheads. You see their helmets? They made his helmets look round. And the New Model Army, they were Parliament's forces, but really, who were they fighting for? They were fighting for God. They were Puritans. They believed that God was on their side because they believed what? If they're Puritan, they're what religion? Think about it. They're Calvinists. So they believe they're part of the elect. Everyone else was reprobate. So of course God is on their side. Fun fact, they actually had pocket Bibles as part of the uniform. They would put it over their heart because they wanted the word of God to protect their lives, their hearts, their souls. We don't do that in this country. We have a secular country in America. That would be crazy. But now what's happening, religious ideology becomes so important that this New Model Army is going to fight for it. And you know, Oliver Cromwell is the great military leader. He's the one that organizes the New Model Army. And we're going to see this. But really quickly, I just want to make sure you understand. If the New Model Army or the Roundheads are fighting for God, might they fight harder? Fight longer? I'm going to say yeah. Because when they're fighting for God, they're fighting for something greater than they are. And we'll see that. On the flip side, the king's forces are called the Cavaliers. And if you ever think about going to the cool school UVA, they're the Cavaliers. The guy dresses like that. And the Cavaliers are the royal forces. And they're going to fight for a king. And think about that. They're fighting for a man. Who's greater? And even if you're not religious, just think about it. Is the concept of God or the concept of a king bigger? I hope you can see. If I'm a Cavalier and I'm fighting and I realize we're losing, I might bail out. I might jump on a boat and come to Virginia, the Cavalier state. I'm telling you, when we look at this, it's going to be really important that you understand the Parliament's forces are the New Model Army, and instead of Parliament, they're really fighting for God. They believe the king is evil, and that's going to change the nature. And for me as a historian, I think that's the number one reason why the Puritans win, why the New Model Army win, because they're fighting against what they consider evil. Now, once you started seeing the war, right, Dr. Spagogo talks about the First Civil War and the Second Civil War. There's a principle here that always occurs, and I need you guys to realize this. All right. At the outcome of the First Civil War, Parliament no longer had a unifying factor. Parliament united against the king. You erase the king, and the liberal forces turn on each other. This is a really important concept because remember, when we look at this, the king's over here, Parliament's over here, right? But when you get rid of the king, Parliament begins to what? Just like the Protestants, Parliament Liberals always define themselves by their differences during the modern era than their similarities. So immediately, once the king's gone, the independents and the Presbyterians turn on each other. And that's what's going on in here, this image. We're about to get to this image. After the Second Civil War, there was something called Pride's Purge. I think Dr. Spavogo has rump parliament, which is cool. Pride's Purge creates rump parliament. And rump parliament, what happens is Oliver Cromwell's army surrounds parliament. And as they surround parliament, they arrest all non-independent MPs. Even though the Presbyterians make up a majority, they don't have the army. The minority, a small group of political leaders, utilize the military to create what we call the Puritan Revolution. And the Puritans, the gentry Puritans, they utilize this moment to transform England into their image, and they're excited to do this because they're hoping to do something great for the elect. A radical religious and social shift occurs. I'm going to tell you, it's not going to be popular because the Puritan Commonwealth, the Puritan Revolution forms the Puritan Commonwealth. What are the political changes? The first thing you see is they cut off the king's head. 1649, Rump Parliament not only executes the king, which is the first time in modern history, but they get rid of the institution. And what else do they? They get rid of the House of Lords. So the only thing standing is the House of Commons. And the House of Commons is the gentry. So the gentry use this to give the gentry political power. And the political power, and they're trying to change. So that's it. Then what do? Religiously, they get rid of all of the Anglican Church. They enforce a theocracy. They unite religious and political ideas. Now, all of a sudden, they're going to use the government to assert religious authority. They're going to get rid of stuff. So religiously, it becomes a Calvinist theocracy. The Puritan Revolution creates a Puritan Commonwealth. And what we see is, just like Calvinist Geneva in a little city, they're going to implement the entire thing to create a religious theocracy. Social changes. This is the implement because the political, religious, and social changes are all the same. They shut down pubs, outlaw alcohol. They shut down theater. Can you imagine England without a Shakespeare theater? But what they're attempting to do is create a England that is the Puritan Revolution, the Puritan world, to make it great and perfect, to allow it for the elect. What do you think the average person is doing in England? The average person was like, wait a minute. I thought you were supposed to give us our liberty. But in reality, the religious, political, and social revolution that they led stripped away our liberty to drink beer, dance, play cards, have Christmas. So the English people began to turn against Puritanism. They wanted their king back. They're like, why can't we sew his head back on? Because they began to think, what in the world do we do? Chaos ensued. Rump Parliament cannot make any decisions. So what happens? Oliver Cromwell uses his new model army to lead a coup d'etat, or a seizure of state. And Oliver Cromwell becomes the military dictator. And he's going to use his military to stabilize. He's going to defeat the groups that are opposed to him. He's going to defeat the Levelers, as you saw if you did your reading well. He's going to go up to Scotland and he's going to defeat the Irish. He is going to centralize the state through his military. That's why we call it the Puritan Protectorate. No longer is it the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth didn't work. It collapsed. And he now fills that void with the military. And he's going to be in power from 1650s to 1668, or 1640s to 1652 to 1658. Unfortunately, when he dies, there's no one left. And that's going to be where we're going to look at the Restoration. Because Parliament decided, Maybe we don't want the Puritans in power anymore. Maybe we want something different. And that's going to bring us to an end of our lecture today, and we're going to finish this up on the next lecture.